Chapter 35. Exchange of Information. Roselle Gustav's secret diary, Emperor Roselle. Indeed, only such matters are worth the concern of a mighty figure like Mr. Fool. Audrey was first taken aback before she realized that she found it nothing surprising. Rumor had it that Emperor Roselle had once seen the blasphemy slate. It was said that the secret cards he created hid the 22 paths of the divine. This was something every high sequence beyonder would definitely pay attention to. Diary? That's a diary? Alger frowned slightly as he keenly noticed this tidbit. The item which Roselle Gustav had left behind had been described by Mr. Fool as a diary. How did he know? How did he determine it? Could he know the way to decipher Roselle's cryptic text? Faced with the hanged man's question, and having obtained the desired effect, Klein leaned back into his chair and interlocked his hands. He answered in a relaxed manner. "Let us first view it as a diary for now." He did not deny or confirm it. Audrey had heard the children of other nobles mention the matter. However, she had never really learned much of it. With her curiosity piqued, she asked, "It said that Emperor Roselle's, diary was written in a cryptic language or symbols he invented." "Yes," answered Alger simply. "Some people believe that it is a unique set of symbols from mysticism. Others believe that it is a hieroglyph. But up to today, no one has found the correct way of deciphering it. At the very least, that's all I know." With that said, he turned his head at Klein in a bid to get some confirmation or show his suspicions. They are texts that have been passed down for generations, so are no longer in their original state. According to your line of thought, how can it be deciphered? Klein maintained his calm as he secretly gave a self-deprecating laugh. As for how to handle the symbols of mysticism, he instantly thought of a ridiculous and funny scene. Dressed in a black pointed hat and long robe, an evil mage pulls up his sleeve to reveal a symbol tattooed on his arm. It was said that this was a symbol with mysterious power left behind by Emperor Roselle. They were written in two blue, large, simplified Chinese characters. "Retarded Joker." The corners of Klein's mouth curved up slowly as he found himself in a good mood. After hearing the hanged man's description, Audrey said in a stumped manner, "We can't understand the symbols or the words. Then, how are we to pass the information to you, Mr. Fool? Or are we to mail it somewhere?" "This is quite an important question. I do not have the means to accept an item secretly." Klein was in no hurry to answer. He repeatedly released his thumbs from his interlocked hands before tapping them back again. Soon, he thought of a solution. "Since I can create a divine palace and table according to my wishes in here, would it be possible to project the content in the minds of others here? I'll give it a try." At that moment, Audrey and Alger saw Mr. Fool slowly sit up amid the thick grayish fog. "Miss Justice, let us give it a try. Imagine a paragraph of text and give it the emotions of writing it with urgency. Yes, pick up the fountain pen beside you and write on the piece of paper." Before Klein finished his sentence, Audrey saw a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and a dark red fountain pen in front of her. She picked up the fountain pen both curiously and doubtfully. In accordance with the instructions, she imagined a poem Emperor Roselle once wrote, "If winter comes, can spring be far behind one?" After scrutinizing the text, she picked up her fountain pen and imbued them with the desire of projecting them out. Klein sensed the emotions, and using the fountain pen as a medium, he guided her. The moment Audrey landed her fountain pen, she saw a line appear on the goatskin parchment. "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" "Goddess, how fascinating!" Audrey exclaimed in astonishment while feeling rueful. Following that, she looked at Klein with some fear. "Mr. Fool, can you read what I'm thinking?" "No, I'm only guiding you. I simplified the process of writing for you and made it become an imprint. If you did not wish to express it, nothing would appear." Klein placated her with a low tone. "Is that so? Then we can only memorize the symbols or the way the cryptic text looks like. Then we can present it directly as we wish?" Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she asked in enlightenment. Yes, Klein answered. That's not a bad method. Miss Justice, do not doubt your memory. After becoming a spectator, you will receive immense improvement in this aspect. Alger had watched the attempt from the side, fully coming to the realization that the fool was more powerful and mysterious than he imagined. As for his memory, he believed that the next advancement would improve it sufficiently. Regarding this, Audrey nodded in delight. You have delighted me with this reminder. Mr. Hanged Man, do you have any other guidance on spectators? With that said, she looked toward the seat of honor. Mr. Fool, I will work hard to complete your mission. I will do my best to gather more of Emperor Roselle's secret diary. I mentioned before that I'm a person who likes a fair and equal exchange. The advance payment I gave is only equivalent to 2 pages of the diary for each person. If there are more, I will give additional in return, Klein said calmly, like he was an adult who did not take advantage of children. As for where the additional payment could come from, it was naturally from the newly acquired Emperor Roselle diary pages. This formed a virtuous cycle. You are truly a generous gentleman. Alger fell silent for a few seconds before bowing slightly, with his hand by his chest. After the bow, he turned to Justice and said, Let me emphasize once more. A spectator will forever be a spectator. I know that many spectators enjoy imagining themselves to be the protagonist or some other character. As a result, they invest a lot of feelings into it, to the point of crying, laughing, raging, and turning sorrowful because of the drama. However, that is not what a spectator should do. While faced with the various dramas of society and figures who knowingly or unknowingly act the role of particular characters, you have to maintain the attitude of being an absolute bystander. Only then can you calmly and objectively observe them. You will discover their habits, their tics from lying, or their scent of nervousness. From those minute clues, you can grasp their true thoughts. Believe me, everyone is different because of their emotions. They will secrete different things and different smells. However, only a real spectator can sniff it out. Once you invest too many of your emotions, your observation will be influenced. Your sensitivity towards the emotions of others will deviate. Audrey listened attentively as her eyes brightened gradually. It sounds really interesting. Klein's heart stirred when he heard that. The spectator potion's requirement, when summarized, seemed to be an absolutely objective and neutral spectator. In a particular sense, it was equivalent to acting. Acting? Was this the acting which Emperor Roselle was referring to? Then I will have to act as a seer, and from there, digest the potion bit by bit. Just as Klein was immersing himself in thought, Alger finished explaining the demands he knew of a spectator. He sighed before saying, It seems like there's nothing else? Perhaps we can have a casual chat. We can talk about things happening around us. Perhaps it is something very normal to you, but in the ears of others it might be a very important clue. Sure. Klein snapped back and nodded slightly. He was already planning to attempt to act as a seer. After all, it did not seem like there were any negative effects from doing so. Then, shall we begin with you, Mr. Hanged Man? Audrey agreed in excitement. Alger thought for a moment before saying, The infamous pirate who calls himself Lieutenant General Deweyville has begun his voyage to explore the eastern end of the Sonia Sea again. Oh? The owner of the Black Tulip? Returned Audrey with a question after some thought. Yes, Alger replied with a nod. I don't even know who that is. Klein listened silently while he pondered over the news he planned on sharing. It had to be something that did not expose him while also allowing him to gain feedback. Soon, he decided. He maintained his unfathomable image as the fool and caressed the side of the bronze table with his fingers. According to what I know, the Secret Order has lost an Antigonus family notebook. This news was not only known by the Nighthawks from Tingan City. The Secret Order, as well as Beyonders, with close ties with them, similarly knew. An Antigonus family notebook? Alger repeated before smiling with a shake of his head. I'm really curious as to what reaction the Church of the Evernight Goddess will have if they learn of it. Why would he mention the Church of the Evernight Goddess? Klein acutely sensed a problem, but it was not appropriate for him to ask. That would shatter his image as the mysterious and profound fool. At that moment, Audrey asked out of curiosity, "Why are you curious? What sort of special reaction would the goddess's church have?" Alger smiled and said, "The Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I'm not really sure if it happened at the end of the Fourth Epoch or the early stages of the present epoch." This. Klein's pupils constricted as a chill suddenly swept through him. From the looks of it, the value the Nighthawks have placed on this Antigonus notebook far exceeds my imagination. The reason why they nominated me as a Beyonder, having some contribution and to prevent danger to me, are likely negligible reasons, is that they wish for me to raise my spiritual sensitivity to aid them in finding the notebook. This was not kept from me by Captain. He had mentioned it, but I just didn't pay much attention to it. After hearing the hanged man's explanation, Audrey said with deep interest, "I never imagined that such a thing would happen. All right, my turn. Let me think of what I have to share." She cocked her head and held her head up with her hand before chuckling. "Yesterday, my etiquette teacher taught me how to faint elegantly without any faux pas. It's a practical skill used at social events to avoid awkward situations or nasty guys." Heh. I was just organizing my thoughts. What I really wanted to say is that ever since the failure of the battle on Balaam's eastern shore, the king, premier, and gentlemen are under immense stress. They eagerly wish to change. Chapter 36. A Simple Question. While Audrey recalled the conversation between her father and elder brother about the situation, she put in her own words. They believe that the government structure is too chaotic. Every election, if there is a change of the ruling party, there will be a change of personnel from top to bottom. It makes things a mess and lowers efficiency tremendously. Not only does it cause the battle loss, it also brings great inconvenience to the civilians. Klein knew very well that as there was no example to reference, the Lowen Kingdom had yet to evolve into a system that examined public servants. The political situation was still in its preliminary stages. Therefore, after every election victory, many so-called positions would be awarded to members and supporters. Emperor Roselle not establishing such an institution in Intis does not match his personality. Could it be that he diverted his focus to other things later in life? When the hanged man, Alger, heard that he interjected with a soft chuckle. They believe? Then their beliefs are a little slow. Perhaps they will only feel the itch a year after they get bitten by black mosquitoes. Black mosquitoes were a type of creature that resided in the south of the Lowen Kingdom. It was extremely venomous, and its venom made victims have the urge to rip apart their skin. Audrey extended her palm and covered her mouth. Ignoring the hanged man's mockery, she expressed the core information of what she said. Unfortunately, they are temporarily unable to find a good solution to replace this system. Klein listened carefully and felt that the topic was in the domain of his expertise. He smiled faintly and said, "This is a simple problem. The Foodaholic Empire and the decadent countries that studied the Foodaholic Empire had very advanced experiences of success." Simple? Audrey returned with a question in puzzlement. Although her education did not include politics, she often heard from the discussions of her father, brother, and people around her. She had a sufficient understanding of similar matters. Klein felt as though he had returned to the message boards of yesteryear. Composed, he said, "An examination, just like an entrance examination for college. Hold an exam that is open to the public. It can be split into 2 rounds or 3 rounds. Use the most objective method to select the elite." But Audrey knew what sort of objection this would entail. Before she had the chance to arrange her thoughts, Klein continued, "After which, use these elites to fill the positions of the cabinet, the county government, the city government, and the various towns. Yes, the positions that are directly handling matters, such as the secretary of the cabinet. Different positions should be given different requirements. The second or third rounds can be tested based on locale and region. Professional matters should be left to the professionals. As for political positions such as ministers, governors, or mayors, they will be left to the parties that win the election. That is a slice of the pie they deserve. Alger, who lacked interest in such matters, unknowingly turned his head and listened carefully. Audrey frowned slightly as she fell into deep thought. There's no hurry in replacing everyone at once. The cabinet and various agencies in the civil service will be crippled if that happens. You can have an examination every year or every 3 years. They can be gradually replaced. Finally, in light of the kingdom's expansion and the salaried civil servants' resignations that will bring in vacancies, you can systematically allot spots. Klein fully expressed his talent as a keyboard politician. He then faced his palm outwards and said, "Such a design can bring the kingdom's insightful elites into the government. Regardless of the party in power or who the minister is, the civil service will allow the kingdom to maintain its basic and effective operations." Of course, a side effect was the birth of the undying devil that was bureaucracy. While considering the suggestion, Audrey asked, doubtfully, "Are you implying that even if those ministers become monkeys, the effects would be insignificant?" "No," Alger interjected suddenly. "I believe that monkeys are a better choice than the present ministers." He paused before adding, "After all, monkeys only need to eat, sleep, and mate. They would not come up with foolish ideas and insist on brainless projects." "Mr. Hanged Man, it sounds you have quite a terrible superior." Klein sat at his seat of honor and shook his head in silent amusement. Audrey ruminated over the suggestion Mr. Fool had offered, and after a while said in surprise, "It sounds like it actually might work. It's a very simple but effective solution." She looked at Klein and sincerely marveled. "Mr. Fool, you must be an elderly person with outstanding intelligence who is very experienced in life." The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a little as he looked at the Hanged Man and Justice for a few silent seconds. "Let us end today's gathering here. If Miss Justice is able to influence her family and effect change on this matter, I can guide Benson ahead of time and give him a chance at becoming a civil servant." On careful thought, Benson was indeed suitable for such a career. However, it is unlikely Justice would take the initiative to do it. This is because the Hanged Man and I can easily find out which noble suggested it and basically guess her identity. Of course, she could do it through a roundabout manner secretly. "By your will." Audrey and Alger stood up together. Klein leaned back slightly and severed the connection. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man's illusory and blurry figures instantly shatter and dissipate. Above the gray fog, in the opulent palace where gods seemingly lived, he was the only one sitting silently at the head of the bronze table. Klein did not plunge into the gray fog like the other time to leave. This was because his mind was still energetic enough after becoming a Beyonder. The reason why he had ended the Tarot Club early was because he learned the true attitude the Nighthawks had towards the Antigonus notebook. He decided that he had to search for it seriously and not sleep all the way. Doing so would make Dunsmith suspicious of his activities at home. Furthermore, he had benefited quite a lot this time. Klein sat on the high-backed chair at the head of the bronze table. His arms leaned on the armrest as he crossed his fingers, while he observed the boundless gray fog carefully. He found the place serene, as though no one had stepped into it for 10 million years. When he established the connection to summon the Hanged Man and Justice, he acutely noticed something. That was the fact that as a Beyonder himself, he had the ability to touch another dark red star. "Does this mean I can summon one more?" Klein recalled the feeling and muttered in confirmation. However, he did not have the urge to make an attempt, since he did not know what the identity of the newcomer would be or what sort of attitude they would have. After all, not everyone was like Justice or the Hanged Man, who had unique personalities that easily blended in and took whatever they needed. They even seemed willing to conceal matters. If he pulled someone like Dunsmith, then the mysterious organization he had just established would instantly come under the watch of the church. As an evil organization's boss, his future would be worrying. Klein knew that the gray fog was special. He knew it was not something a beyonder at Dunsmith's sequence could see through. But the problem was that since he had the powers of a beyonder, he had to consider the existence of the gods. Klein had chosen to carefully believe that the 7 orthodox gods existed in reality. Of course, he was more tenable to the belief that these gods were just more powerful than high-sequence beyonders. Furthermore, they were under strict limitations. At the very least, ever since the 5th epoch, apart from a few oracles, they have not appeared again. Hey, forcefully pulling people here isn't a good thing. No one would wish to be pulled into mystery for some baffling reason. Let's wait and see how things go in the future. Klein sighed and stood up. He released his spirituality and sensed his body's existence. Then, he began imitating the heavy feeling of rapidly plunging down. The scenes in front of him changed. The gray fog and dark red instantly departed him. Klein felt like he had torn through endless water membranes before ultimately seeing the real world, his room in darkness. This time he was fully awake and seriously took in the entire experience. Strange. There are some differences between the gray fog and the spirit world. Klein moved his limbs and felt the existence of his body. After he seriously thought through the experience, he shook his head, walked to the desk, and pulled open the curtains. Whoosh! The curtains were drawn as sunlight poured in, illuminating the room. As he looked at the street outside the oriel window and the pedestrians going back and forth, Klein took a deep breath and muttered silently, "It's time to go out and work. How should I act as a seer? It cannot be rushed. All I can do is use spirit vision now." Backlund, Empress Borough. Audrey Hall looked at herself in the mirror. She saw her cheeks flushed red with excitement and her eyes so bright that they would have daunted anyone from looking into them. She did not examine any of this as she hurriedly recalled. She picked up the ruby-studded fountain pen and wrote the formula to the Spectator potion on the exquisite goatskin parchment. 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cow teeth payanol powder, 7 petals of elf flowers, a matured manhale fish's eyeball, 35 milliliters of goat horn blackfish blood. Phew. Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she read it a few times to confirm that she had not made any mistakes. She had the urge to dance again, but reminded herself to remain restrained. After some thought, she began writing various chemical names around the potion's formula. She then faked the page into complicated and messy chemistry. Yes, as long as one doesn't read it carefully, a person who flips through this randomly will not discover the details I have hidden in here. Excellent. Audrey praised herself and turned her mind towards the acquirement of the materials. I'll first search the few vaults we have. I'll then attempt to exchange for the missing parts with others. If I still can't gather them all, I can only seek help from the hanged man or the fool. What can I offer as payment? After some thought, Audrey closed the notebook and placed it on a tiny bookshelf. Following that, she briskly walked to the door and pulled it open. A golden retriever was sitting obediently outside. The corners of Audrey's mouth curled as she revealed a radiant smile. Susie, you completed the mission perfectly. In the serialized stories on the newspapers, detectives would often have a capable assistant. I think there should be a huge dog supporting a real spectator. In an underground basement lit only by a flickering candle, Alger Wilson raised his palm and looked at it carefully. After a long while, he let out a sigh. It's still that miraculous. I was unable to figure out any specific details at all. Despite having made sufficient preparations, he failed to understand how the fool had completed the summoning. He moved his gaze down and looked at the goatskin parchment on the table in front of him. At the title head of the yellowish-brown parchment, there was a Hermes sentence written in dark blue ink. 7. Seafarer. Chapter 37. The Club. Under the scorching afternoon sun, Klein left his house. Since he had to walk all the way from Iron Cross Street to Welch's place, he wore a linen shirt instead of his formal attire of top hat and leather boots. He wore a matching brown coat, a round felt hat, and a pair of old leather shoes. That way, he did not need to worry that the stench of his sweat would contaminate the rather expensive suit. As he went down Daffodil Street, he strolled toward Iron Cross Street. When he passed by the square around the corner, he subconsciously took a glance. The tents had already vanished. The circus troupe from before had left after finishing their performance. Klein originally imagined the animal trainer who had helped him tell his fortune to be a hidden expert. He believed she had purposely appeared to guide him after discovering something unique about him, and that she would meet him and provide hints for the future. However, none of that happened. She left for the next stop in the tour with the circus troupe. How can there be so many cliched tropes? Klein shook his head while grimacing a smile. He turned toward Iron Cross Street. Iron Cross Street was not characterized by just a single street. Like its name suggested, it was formed by two roads that crossed each other. With the intersection at its core, it was split into Left Street, Right Street, Upper Street, and Lower Street. Klein, Benson, and Melissa previously lived on Lower Street. However, the residents living at his former apartment and the surrounding area did not think of the area as Lower Street. Instead, they created the term Middle Street. By doing so, they made a clear difference between those staying there and the poor who lived 200 meters down the road. There, a bedroom was occupied by 5 or 6 people, and sometimes even up to 10. Klein walked along the periphery of Left Street as he let his mind wander. He recalled the Antigonus family's notebook and how it was missing. He thought of its importance to the Nighthawks and thought of the deaths that resulted from it. His heart slowly turned heavy as his face turned ashen. At that moment, a familiar voice sounded. "Lad?" "Oh." Klein turned his head curiously and found himself by Smyron Bakery's entrance. Mrs. Wendy, with a head of gray hair, was greeting him with a wave and a warm smile. "You don't look very happy?" Wendy asked genially. Klein rubbed his face and said, "A little." "Regardless of your worries, tomorrow will always come," said Mrs. Wendy with a smile. "Here, try out my newly created sweet iced tea. I'm not sure if it suits the palate of the locals." "Locals? Aren't you one, Mrs. Smyron?" Klein shook his head in amusement. "Trying out something means it's free, right?" Wendy Smyron raised her chin a little and said, "You guessed right. I'm actually a Southerner. I came to Tingen with my husband, but that was more than 40 years ago. Heh heh. Back then, Benson was not born yet. Even your parents did not know each other. I have always been a little unaccustomed to the dietary preferences of Northerners, and I'm always missing my hometown's food. I miss pork sausages, potato bread, roasted pancakes, vegetables fried in lard, and roasted meat with specialty sauces. Oh, and I also miss sweet iced tea." Klein suffused a smile when he heard that. "Mrs. Smyron, this sure is a topic that makes me hungry, but I feel a lot better. Thank you very much." "Delicacies can always cure sorrow." Wendy handed him a cup of brownish-red liquid. "This is sweet iced tea I made according to my memories. Try it and tell me if it's nice." After thanking her, Klein took a sip and found it resembling iced red tea from Earth. However, it was not as stimulating. The taste of tea was stronger and felt more refreshing. It instantly expelled the heat brought by the burning sun. "It's excellent," he marveled. "That puts me at ease." Wendy smiled with squinted eyes as she watched him finish the cup of tea in a genial manner. After chatting with Mrs. Smyron about his moving, Klein returned to the street he was most familiar with. There were far fewer street-side hawkers in the afternoon. They gathered again after 5:30. The ones that stayed behind looked drowsy and listless. The moment he entered the area, Klein's heart suddenly felt overwhelmed by darkness. His heart felt heavy, down, and gloomy for an inexplicable reason. What's happening? He sharply sensed something wrong about himself. He immediately stopped and observed his surroundings, but did not see anything strange. After some thought, Klein raised his hand and tapped his glabella like he was thinking. The extent of his vision immediately transformed. The auras of the hawkers and pedestrians all appeared. Before Klein could observe the colors of their health, his attention was pulled away by the colors that represented gloominess. He was unable to determine the exact thoughts of the observed, but the despondent, apathetic, and gloomy impression was deeply carved into his heart. As he surveyed the area, he realized that even the sun could not disperse those dark colors. It was a sense of gloom that tainted them from years of repression. Upon seeing this, Klein instantly understood the reason. Just as old Neil said, activating his spirit vision easily pulled him into unfamiliar environments and made him feel discomfort. It was also easy for himself to be affected by the emotions of others. A similar principle could be used on an ability like perception. This was an ability he obtained without additional practice after becoming a seer. It was a passive sense that could not be declined. It allowed him to directly sense the existence of anything abnormal. There was bound to be a level of interaction when perceiving things. Therefore, in the beyonder eyes of someone like a spirit medium, the intensity of everyone's perception is clear. It is like a fire in the night. Therefore, people with high perceptivity were naturally affected by the intense atmosphere of anything abnormal. It could only be repeatedly practiced to grasp, control, and adapt to such outcomes. Such a repressed color is probably formed over extended periods of time, right? Klein sighed as he shook his head, feeling somewhat affected. He tapped his glabella twice again and tried hard to converge his spirituality. Tap, tap, tap. Klein walked toward the apartment and sensed for any abnormal existences or tiny connections, while also searching for the Antigonus family's notebook, which he had hidden. The streets were the same as usual. There was filthy water and trash on the streets. It only cleared up when he reached the apartment's entrance. Klein pushed open the half-closed door and circled the first floor in the darkness that the sunlight could not reach. The wooden stairs creaked constantly as he went up them. The second floor was as dim as always. Klein released his perception and looked into the darkness. However, not only did he fail to discover any clues regarding his notebook, he even failed to see any invisible spiritual bodies. If it's so easy to encounter them, most ordinary people would not have already sensed the existence of extraordinary matters. Klein sighed in reflection. He had already understood that most spirits did not exist in the form of spiritual bodies, but in the form of spirituality. Only a spirit medium could effectively communicate with them. After circling the third floor once, Klein left the apartment and retraced his memory's footsteps towards Welch's place. He walked for a full hour, but did not discover anything along the way. Standing outside the gardened bungalow, Klein looked at the building through the locked iron gates and mumbled to himself, "There's no need for me to search Welch's place, right? Captain and Madam Daly must have done a carpet search of the place. Besides, I don't have the key. They can't expect me to climb the walls, right? I'll try another path tomorrow. I've walked so much today, but there are no step counter rankings." While lampooning, Klein returned to the nearby district. He planned on taking a public carriage to Blackthorn Security Company to retrieve his daily allocation of 30 bullets. He needed to make use of his time and practice. A seer's lack of quick and effective offensive means could only be made up with his revolver and cane. The district around Welch's place was relatively clean. Shops with clean and bright windows lined the two sides of the street. At the turn of the street, Klein was just about to seek out the carriage stop when his gaze swept past a few signboards on the second floor. Harrod's Department Store, Military Veterans Mess, Divination Club. Divination Club. Klein silently repeated the name and recalled that he had to act as a seer. Yes, I should take a look and seek out new ideas. Amid his mixed thoughts, Klein went across the street and went to the second floor. He entered the main foyer to see a beautiful female attendant. The woman, with coiled brownish-yellow hair, sized up Klein before saying with a smile, Sir, do you wish to have your fortune told, or do you wish to join our club? What are the conditions for entry? Asked Klein casually. The woman explained with great familiarity. Fill in your particulars and pay an annual membership fee. The first year is £5, and subsequent years will be £1 a year. Don't worry, we are not like political or business clubs, which allow entry through recommendations from formal members. Members can freely use the club's meeting room and various divination rooms and tools. They can enjoy the coffee and tea we provide and read the newspapers and magazines we subscribe for free. They can buy lunch, dinner, and alcoholic beverages at cost price, as well as education materials and materials needed for divination. In addition, we invite at least one famous fortune teller to lecture every month to answer any questions. Most importantly, you can find a bunch of friends with the same hobbies and have an exchange with them. It sounds pretty good, but I do not have the money. Klein gave a self-deprecating smile before asking, then what if I want my fortune told? Chapter 38. Novice Hobbyist. Upon hearing Klein's question, the beautiful lady with elegantly tied-up brownish-yellow hair appeared to lose her patience. However, she maintained her smile and said, Our members are free to do divination for others in the club. They also have their prices, and we take a very tiny cut as a fee. If you wish to have your fortune told, you can take a look at this album. It has introductions and rates of the members who are willing to do divination for others. However, it's Monday afternoon, so most of our members are busy at work. We only have 5 here today. As she introduced the club, she invited Klein to have a seat on the sofa beside a window in the reception hall. Then she flipped through the album and pointed out the present club members. Anas Vincent, famous Tingan fortune teller, the club's resident mentor, good at various forms of divination. He charges 4 solely each time. It's really expensive. That's enough to feed Benson, Melissa, and me to 2 sumptuous dinners. Klein clicked his tongue silently and did not reply. When the woman saw this, she continued flipping the page and introducing one member after another. And the final one, Glacis, a member who joined the club this year. He is skilled in tarot divination. He charges 2 pence each time. Sir, who do you plan on choosing? Klein did not stand on ceremony and answered, Mr. Glacis. The female attendant fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, Sir, I have to remind you that Mr. Glacis is only considered a novice. I understand. I will be responsible for my own decision. Klein nodded with a smile. Then please follow me. The woman stood up and led Klein through a door beside the reception hall. It was not a very long corridor, and an open meeting room was situated at its end. There was enough sunlight, and it was equipped with tables and chairs. There were newspapers, magazines, and paper cards. A faint coffee aroma drifted out. About 2 rooms from the meeting room, the attendant gestured for Klein to stop. She sped up her pace and entered the room. She shouted gently, Mr. Glacis, someone wishes for your divination. Me? A voice filled with surprise and doubt immediately sounded. Following that, there was the sound of a chair moving. Yes, which divination room would you like to use? Replied the lady without any emotion. Topaz room. I like Topaz. Glacis appeared by the meeting room's door and looked curiously at Klein, who was waiting not far away. He was a man in his 30s. His skin was slightly dark, and his pupils were a dark green shade. Under his light yellow and soft hair, he was dressed in a white shirt and black vest. A monocle hung from his chest, and he seemed to have a good disposition. The attendant did not say anything further, as she opened the door to the Topaz room, which was next to the meeting room. The curtains inside were tightly shut, making it dim. It appeared that only by doing so would one gain revelations from the gods and spirits to obtain an accurate divination outcome. Hello there. I'm Glacis. I never expected you to choose me for your divination. Glacis gave a gentleman's bow, briskly stepped into the room, and sat behind a long table. Frankly, I'm only attempting divination for others. I do not have much experience. For now, I'm not a good fortune teller. You still have a chance for regret. After Klein returned the bow, he entered and closed the door behind him. By the light seeping through the curtains, He said with a smile, "You are a really honest man, but I'm someone who is very firm on his choices. Please, have a seat." Glasses pointed at the seat in front of him and thought for a few seconds. "Divination is my hobby. Heh heh. In life, one often receives guidance from the divine, but the ordinary person is unable to accurately understand the meaning. This is the reason why divination exists, and also why I joined this club. In this aspect, I still lack confidence. Let's make the divination that follows an exchange, a free exchange. How do you like my suggestion? I'll cover the fees the club requires. It's just a quarter-pence." Klein did not agree or shake his head. Instead, he smiled. "From the looks of it, you have a pretty well-paying and decent job." While he said so, he leaned his body forward slightly. He held his forehead with his right fist and tapped at it twice. "But that does not enhance the accuracy of my divination," answered Glasses humorously. "Does your head hurt? Do you want to divine problems regarding health?" "A little. I wish to divine where an item is." Klein had already thought of an excuse as he slowly leaned back. In his eyes, Glasses's aura clearly presented itself. The orange colors by his lungs were dark and sparse. They even influenced the brightness in other areas. This is not a symptom of exhaustion. Klein nodded in an indiscernible manner. "Are you searching for a lost item?" Glasses thought for a few seconds before saying, "Then let's do a simple determination." He pushed the neatly stacked tarot cards on the black table toward Klein. "Calm down. Think of that item and ask yourself, can it still be found? While doing so, shuffle and cut the deck." "All right." Klein actually did not remember what the ancient notebook looked like. All he could do was repeat the question to himself. Can the Antigonus family's notebook still be found? While he repeated the thought, he skillfully shuffled and cut the deck. Glacis picked the topmost card and pushed it in front of Klein. The card was facing down horizontally. Turn it clockwise until it sits vertical, then flip it open. If the card is inverted, which means the picture on the card is facing away from you, it indicates that the item cannot be found. If the card is upright, then we can continue the divination and seek its actual location. Klein followed his instructions and turned the horizontal card vertical. He clasped the end of the tarot card and flipped it over. It was an inverted card. "What a pity." Glasses sighed. Klein did not respond because his attention was focused on the tarot card in front of him. The inverted card's picture was dressed in gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress. The Fool. It's the Fool again? It can't be so coincidental, right? According to the Hanged Man and Old Neil, divination is the outcome of the communication of spirituality and the spirit world with a higher dimensional me. Tarot cards are only a convenient tool to read what the truth symbolizes. In theory, using any divination item doesn't matter as it doesn't affect the outcome. Klein frowned as he thought for a moment. Can it be divined whether the item is already in the hands of others? Of course. Follow the same procedure and do it again. Glacis nodded with rich interest. Klein shuffled and cut the deck while thinking of his question. He drew a card and placed it horizontally before turning it vertical clockwise. He finished all the preparations with a serious expression. Taking a deep breath, Klein reached out his hand and flipped over the tarot card. Please do not be the Fool again. While praying, he suddenly relaxed, because the card was that of the Star, and it was inverted. From the looks of it, the item has not been taken by others yet, interpreted Glasses with a smile. Klein nodded and raised his right hand. He tapped his glabella, looking as though he was deep in thought. Then he took out 2 pennies with a dark copper luster from his pocket and pushed it towards Glacis. Didn't I say it was free? Glacis said with a frown. Klein laughed as he got up. This is the respect divination deserves. All right. Thank you for your generosity. Glacis stood up and reached out his hand. After shaking his hand, Klein took 2 steps back and turned around. He walked to the door and twisted the doorknob. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly turned his head and made a terse sound. Mr. Glacis, I suggest that you see a doctor as soon as possible. Focus on your lungs. Why? Asked Glacis in surprise. Are you cursing me because you aren't pleased with the divination results? Klein thought for a moment before saying, It's a symptom based on the color of your face. Well, Your glabella seems dark, one. Glabella seems dark. It was the first time Glasses was hearing such a description. Klein did not explain further as he walked out the room with a smile. He closed the wooden door behind him. Is he an unlicensed doctor or a herbalist? Glasses shook his head, amused. He then picked up his monocle for divination. On careful look, he realized his glabella was indeed dark. But this was a problem of the environment. In the darkness due to the closed curtains, not only was his glabella dark, his entire face was shrouded in darkness. It's not a very likable joke, Glasses muttered. He worriedly divined his own health to make sure that everything was all right. After leaving the divination club, Klein had an additional plan for the future. It was to save as much money as possible to pay the annual fee to become a member of the club, after which he could begin acting as a seer. As for why he did not choose to do it independently, it was because he temporarily lacked the resources and channels. He could not bring himself to stand on the streets as a hawker, since he cared for his reputation. A few minutes later, the public carriage arrived. He spent 2 pence and reached Zootaland Street, which was not very far off. He pushed open the door to Blackthorn Security Company but did not see the familiar brown-haired girl. He only saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell with his poetic bearing behind the reception counter. "Good afternoon. Where's Roseanne?" Klein asked, after taking off his hat and bowing. Leonard smiled and pointed at the partition. "It's her shift tonight at the armory." Without waiting for Klein to ask another question, Leonard said as though he was pondering over a matter, "Klein, I have a question that has always puzzled me." "What is it?" Klein was puzzled. Leonard stood up and smilingly said with a relaxed tone, "Why did Welch and Naya commit suicide on the spot while you returned home?" "It likely has to do with how the unknown existence made me take the Antigonus family's notebook away to hide it," answered Klein with the official surmise. Leonard paced around before turning to look straight into Klein's eyes. "If your suicide was meant to silence you and wipe out any clues, why weren't you made to destroy the notebook there and then?" Chapter 39. Interesting trick. In fact, I do not know if the notebook is destroyed or hidden, but by using backward reasoning, if it is to be destroyed, it could have been done on the spot. There was no need for me to take it away to carry out the destruction. Upon hearing Leonard's question, Klein instantly went into keyboard detective mode and said with a sigh, "Perhaps when Welch, Naya, and I made contact with the unknown existence, it enjoyed the sacrifice of life, or wished for similar situations to continue. With the suicide definitely easily discoverable, I was made to take away the notebook to hide it so as to prepare for the existence's second round of entertainment. However, some mishap happened during the process, and I failed to succeed in my suicide." This was a reasoned guess Klein made from his consumption of novels, movies, and TV dramas, which involved cult sacrifices. As for the mishap that happened midway, he knew very well that it was due to the unexpected variable of him being a transmigrator. Quite a good explanation, but I believe there might be other possibilities. Welch's and Naya's suicide sacrifice might have made it possible for the unknown existence to descend on this world. Then, that notebook is a vessel or a breeding ground for evil. It made you take it away to hide it, worried that we would destroy it if we discovered its birth, before it became strong. Leonard Mitchell suggested another possibility. Having said that, he stared into Klein's eyes and smiled slightly. "Of course, perhaps the notebook has been destroyed. The goal is to hide its content, to conceal the vessel or the brooding of evil. That way, there is a sufficient reason for your failed suicide." What does he mean? Is he suspecting me? Is he suspecting that the original Klein's body is a vessel or used for the brooding of evil? No. What he's being a vessel for is a transmigrator. Actually, brooding isn't a correct term. Klein was taken aback. While he secretly criticized the idea, he weighed his words. "I will not try to defend myself since I've lost memories from that period. Be it Captain or Madam Daly, they have already confirmed that I'm fine. Your joke isn't funny. I'm only considering a possibility. It does not eliminate the blow the unknown existence encountered when it descended which caused your suicide to fail. We believe that the goddess will ultimately bless us. Leonard laughed as he changed the subject. Did you discover anything in the afternoon? After the conversation and the previous encounters, Klein was very wary of Leonard. He answered in a composed manner, "No, I plan on trying a different route tomorrow afternoon." He pointed to the partition and said, "I'll need to head to the armory to draw the bullets." The shooting club opened to 9 at night. After all, its availability increased only after many of its members got off work. "May Goddess bless you." Leonard smiled as he gestured the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. He watched Klein pass through the partition and listened to his footsteps down the stairs. Leonard's smile gradually vanished as a look of doubt appeared in his green eyes. He whispered something with a displeased tone. Down the stairs, Klein followed the gas lamp-illuminated corridor to the armory and archives. The iron door was open, and the brown-haired Roseanne was standing in front of the table. She was chatting with a top-hat-wearing middle-aged man with a thick black beard. "Good afternoon. No, good evening. It's always night here. Klein, I heard from old Neil that you have become a beyonder. It's called seer?" Roseanne turned her head and deluged him with her questions. She did not hide her curiosity and concern. Klein nodded with a smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Roseanne. It's indeed always night here, but it makes one feel a sense of serenity. The description you gave wasn't accurate enough. It should be said that the sequence potion I consumed has the name Seer." "You still chose to become a beyonder after all," Roseanne said with a sigh as she fell into a deep thought. Klein looked at the middle-aged man beside her and asked politely, "You are?" "Another Nighthawk member or one of the other 2 civilian staff I have not met." Roseanne puckered her lips and said, "Brett, our colleague. He wishes to change slots with me to free up the night after tomorrow. He plans on going to the theater in the North District with his wife to watch The Prideful One. It's to celebrate their 15th-year wedding anniversary. He's truly a romantic gentleman." Brett smiled as he extended his hand and said, "With Miss Roseanne around, there's nothing that requires repeating. Hello, Klein. I never expected you to become a beyonder so quickly. As for me, I might never have the courage." "Perhaps it's as the saying goes, the ignorant knows no fear," Klein said in a self-deprecating manner as he extended his hand to shake Brett's. "Me not having courage is not something bad," said Brett with a shake of his head. "A beyonder once told me before his death to never probe the strange and dangerous matters. The less you know, the longer you live." At that moment, Roseanne interjected, "Klein, there's no need to mind it. I heard from old Neil that as a seer, you are used as support. It's relatively safe as long as you do not attempt to communicate with unknown existences. Why are you dressed in such clothes? It's so unbecoming of a gentleman. What are you here for?" "I'm here to draw my 30 bullets." Klein did not reply to Roseanne's first question. He believed that the lady would quickly forget the matter. "All right." Roseanne pointed at the table and said, "Brett, it's all yours. You should know where the keys and bullets are. Oh, old Neil really is petty. He did not even leave his hand-ground coffee behind. He promised me that I could drink my fill today." She prattled on as Klein received the bullets. The duo left together and went their separate ways at Zudeland Street. One took a public carriage home while the other walked into the shooting club. Bang, bang, bang. Klein repeated the process, gripping the gun, raising his arms, shooting, releasing the cylinder, ejecting the empty shells, and stuffing in rounds again and again. He became familiar with the process and built it into his muscle memory. Of course, he had a few breaks in between to review and correct the process. After finishing his practice, Klein used the grounds to do various exercises like push-ups. He worked hard to train his body to improve his physique. Once everything was over, he sat in an untracked carriage home. Only then he realized it was nearing 7 and the sky was already dark. Just as Klein was planning to head to the market or streets to buy the ingredients for dinner, the door opened. Melissa had returned with her stationery-filled bag. Apart from that, she carried quite a lot of groceries. "I thought you and Benson would be home rather late. This morning I took out one solely from the place you hide the money." Upon seeing her brother's questioning look, Melissa explained in her usual serious manner, "Since you took the money, why didn't you take the public carriage to school?" Klein had been reminded of the matter from the morning. Melissa said with a frown, "Why should I take a public carriage? It costs 4 pence to get to school." A return trip means 8 pence. Counting Benson and you, we will be spending 24 pence on transportation daily. That's a whole solely. In a week, yes, without counting Sunday, that's still 12 pence. It's almost equal to our rent. Stop, stop, stop. Don't flaunt your mathematical prowess. Klein lowered his palm in an amused manner. Melissa first stopped before adding, "It's pretty good walking to school. Our teacher said that everyone should exercise frequently. Besides, I can pick some damaged components on the way." Klein chuckled and said, "Then let's do the math again. The public carriage costs 12 solely. The rent is 12 solely and 3 pence. It's a total of £1, 4 solely and 3 pence. Using Benson's salary is enough to pay for it, and there will be quite a bit of change left. Yes, he has received last week's salary. As for me, I can still earn £1, 10 solely every week. Even if we eat meat every day while counting expenses like gas, charcoal, wood, and condiments, we would still have some left if we are frugal with lunch. We can even subscribe to the morning papers for just 1 penny. In 2 months, when I make up for the advanced payment, I can save money for both you and Benson. We can have new clothes. But we have to think of the possible accidents." Melissa stayed firm on her point. Klein smiled at her and said, "Then we can eat less meat. Don't you find spending 100 minutes on the road a waste of time? You could use that time to read more and think over problems and improve your results. That way, Melissa, you will be graduate with excellent grades. You will be able to find a job with a pretty good salary. When that happens, what is there to worry about?" He fully displayed his experience gained from debating with people on message boards and finally convinced Melissa. She agreed to take the public carriage to school. Phew, I finally suckered her into doing it. No, how can I call it suckering? This is called convincing. Klein lampooned before taking over the groceries that Melissa had bought. He said with a sigh, "Remember to buy beef or meat like mutton and chicken. Eat until you're full and enjoy yourself. Only then will you be equipped with a healthy body and a clever brain to match the demanding requirements needed for your studies." Just mentioning it makes me salivate. Melissa puckered her lips, and after a few seconds of silence said, "All right." The next morning, after ensuring that Melissa took a public carriage, Klein and Benson separated and went to their respective companies. The moment Klein stepped into the door, he saw old Neil and Roseanne chatting by the reception desk. The former was still in his classic black robe, without any concern for the gazes of others. The latter had changed into a casual, cream-colored dress. "Good morning, Mr. Neil, Miss Roseanne," greeted Klein as he took off his hat. Old Neil gave him a mischievous look. "Good morning. You did not hear anything you shouldn't have heard last night, right?" "No, I slept very well." Klein was also quite puzzled over that. He could only put it down to his inadequate perception. "Ha ha ha, don't mind that. Actually, it's not that easily heard." Old Neil pointed to the partition and said, "Go to the armory. We will continue out mysticism lessons this morning." Klein nodded and followed old Neil down the stairs and arrived at the armory to replace Brett, who had been on duty the entire night. "What will we be learning today?" asked Klein curiously. Old Neil dragged out his response and said, "The complicated and basic knowledge. But before that, let me teach you an interesting trick." He pointed at the silver chain on his wrist. There was a pure moonstone hanging from the chain. Chapter 40. Mysticism Curriculum. "An interesting trick?" Klein asked out of extreme curiosity. Old Neil chuckled and said, "I'll complete my patrol of the armory, storeroom, and archives. Use the 2 cups on the table to make 2 cups of coffee. In one of the cups, put something unpleasant. As for what it is, you can decide for yourself. Use your imagination. The only request from me is to not waste too much coffee powder. Those are coffee beans grown on the Potter Plateau and hand-ground by me." "All right." Although Klein was unsure what old Neil was up to, he happily agreed to it. He watched him open the iron gates to the armory with a copper key, and then heard the echoing footsteps inside. Slowly, he settled the cups down and confirmed that there was still hot water in the kettle. He removed the silver tin can's lid, and using a tiny spoon with a metallic sheen, Klein scooped a spoonful of rich aromatic coffee powder into each of the 2 cups. Then, he poured in the hot water and stirred it. As a transmigrator who came from an era abundant in resources, he was no stranger to coffee. However, it was only limited to instant coffee. After finishing the task, Klein pondered for a moment and sat down. He crossed his right leg and took some of the mud which had stained the bottom of his leather boots and placed it in the left cup. Then, he carefully stirred it again until the colors and smells of the 2 cups of coffee were practically indistinguishable. A few minutes later, old Neil walked out the armory while swinging his keys. He then closed the iron gates with a clang. "Are you done?" His turned his slightly turbid dark red eyes over and looked at Klein across the table. "Yes," replied Klein with a nod. Old Neil chuckled and removed the silver chain around his wrist and sat down. His expression quickly turned serene. He held out his chain-holding left hand and allowed it to hang over the coffee cup to his right. The moonstone nearly touched the liquid. Amid the relaxing calmness, the moonstone trembled suddenly. It began spinning the chain in a counterclockwise manner. "This cup is the one with the unpleasant thing," said old Neil surely. Without waiting for Klein to confirm, he put away the silver chain and picked up the other cup of coffee and took a sip. "Do you like bitter coffee? I'm used to having a tablespoon of sugar and a tablespoon of milk." Klein did not reply, but instead asked with his interest piqued, "Your divination sure is accurate. Was it because of the moonstone? That was moonstone, right?" "This is known as pendulum dowsing in divination. It's also called spirit dowsing. It relies on your own astral projection's connection with the spirit world and space to communicate with spiritual intelligence through the aid of natural materials, such as crystals, gems, or special metals. The good and bad of things can be divined. Let's talk about the 2 cups of coffee. A counterclockwise motion implies bad, while a clockwise motion is good. If it doesn't move, it's neither good or bad. You can write the statement on a piece of paper. Take note, it's a statement and not a question." Old Neil put down the cup of coffee and explained in detail. Klein asked as though he was thinking, "Does that mean one should use questioning sentences?" "Yes, you cannot use, 'Is so-and-so willing to be my fiancé?' But you should instead use, 'So-and-so is willing to be my fiancé.' Write it on a piece of paper and place it on the desk. Then use your dominant hand to hold the pendulum chain. Take note, use your dominant hand," said old Neil with a chuckle. "When doing so, keep your arm straight. Adjust the chain's length and make the moonstone hang just above the piece of paper to the point of almost touching what we wrote. Then, close your eyes and repeat the sentence 7 times in your mind. Open your eyes when you are done and see if the spirit pendulum turns or not. If it doesn't, close your eyes again and repeat the process until it moves." Klein nodded slightly and asked, "Counterclockwise means no, and clockwise means yes." "It can also be interpreted as success or failure," corrected old Neil. He taught Klein the other usages and details of spirit pendulum divination. Klein pondered over the matter and discovered that it was a very useful divination trick. For instance, he could quickly use it in an unfamiliar environment to determine if the food he was offered was poisonous or not. He did not need any additional knowledge of field biology. Of course, such divination methods were overly simple. The answers he could receive were limited to 2 or 3. There was no way for deeper investigation or interpretation. For example, although something could be harmful to the body, it could become very beneficial after some processing. An example was certain foods. They were indeed damaging to the body, but nothing serious. If one was on the brink of starving, eating it would not be a huge problem. These were things that spirit dowsing could not determine. "I will have to quickly save money to buy crystals or pure silver to create a spirit pendulum." Klein sighed. Old Neil looked at him in puzzlement. "You can apply for one directly. This is standard issue for Beyonders, especially Beyonders like us who take on a support role. There's still a topaz and pure silver spirit pendulum in the armory. But I'm still not a formal member of the team." Klein's heart palpitated in excitement, but he felt a little hesitant. Old Neil chuckled and said, "For Beyonders, regardless of whether they are formal members or not, they have to be provided with conveniences in other areas since there's no pay rise. Maybe the word perk is more suitable. I'll apply with Captain later." Klein clenched his fists secretly as he made up his mind. How was he to know if Captain would approve his request without trying? "All right," said old Neil with a smile. "We can officially begin our mysticism curriculum. The basics consist of symbolism. Do you know what symbolism means?" Klein recalled the bits and pieces he had heard and the things he had seen and heard from his spirit world and the gray fog. He deliberated and said, "Regardless of the spirit world or the illusory stellar space, as well as the unknown realms, they are beyond our sensory world. It's not something that can be accurately described by the information our ears, nose, and eyes obtain. What we obtain are simply indescribable experiences and direct revelations. They also appear as abstract characters or pictorial symbols. These symbols represent different items and different meanings." "Very accurate, as expected of a seer." Old Neil nodded solemnly. "Only by grasping the ability to interpret the symbols can you really take the next step into the world of mysticism. Yes, the pictures on tarot cards and each of the elements in the pictures are symbols. They are man-made symbols that help us understand and interpret primordial revelations." He pulled out a piece of paper and picked up a fountain pen beside him. He drew a short curve. Following that, he added a few vertical lines beneath the curve. He looked up at Klein and asked, "Do you know what this symbol represents?" Klein looked at it for quite a while before saying hesitatingly, "Eyelashes?" Old Neil exhaled. "This is the symbol of the Bumper Harvest constellation. This is the Thunderous constellation. And this is the Frost constellation." He casually drew a few more symbols. As Klein memorized them, he could not help but comment, "The names of these constellations are really, especially unsophisticated. Yes, unsophisticated." "How tacky and primordial." Old Neil revealed a smile. Emperor Roselle thought the same back then. He always had the intention of changing the constellation names to things like Virgo, Cancer, and Scorpio. Unfortunately, he did not have the strength to go against tradition. At the very least, these constellations' old names and the corresponding dates they represent guide farming and harvests. I have to say that Emperor Roselle sure is a person with ideas. Klein was at a loss for words. Yes, Emperor Roselle was likely a decent person when he was alive. Old Neil was unable to understand Klein's humor as he continued explaining the various basic symbols, such as the various constellations, the sun, the crimson moon, the brown star, the red star, and the blue star. While talking about these, he would teach Klein how to draw the divination astrolabe and indicate what things to pay attention to. He also taught the materials and creation of a crystal ball and the choice of incantations. The teachings overwhelmed Klein. If not for his discovery that the seer potion had improved his memory slightly, he would have long asked old Neil to stop to aid his digesting of the information. That's all for today's mysticism class. Think over it yourself and ask me if you have any questions. Old Neil took out a gold pocket watch and opened it with a snap to check the time. Do not forget to read the historical documents I prepared for you. To be frank, I feel fear seeing them. All right. Klein took the pieces of paper that were sketched with symbols by old Neil. He quickly went through the mysticism knowledge he learned today to prevent himself from forgetting it. Old Neil took a sip of a newly brewed cup of coffee and said, "Memory itself won't do. You have to use if often. That way, you can make the knowledge instinctual. Also, cogitation has to be carried on every day. Only more practice and usage will allow you to grasp the power of the potion, digging into the mysteries it hides away and removing its unpleasant effects." With this raised, Klein recalled acting and the divination club. He probed, "My potion's abilities are related to divination. Practicing by myself will not do. I need to make contact with lots of people and divine for them to quickly grasp it. I plan on joining the Divination Club after having some spare cash, the one on Howe Street in Northborough, to become a real seer." This was not something he could hide from the Nighthawks in the future. It was better to prepare them. "Your idea is very similar to Daly's. She has always clamored to be a real spirit medium." Old Neil shook his head and laughed. "But why must you wait till you have spare cash? You can apply to Dunn and get him to approve of the expenses. Organizations like a divination club might also have cultists or members of evil organizations in them. As a civilian staff member of the Nighthawks and a standard Beyonder, your membership makes it easy for us to monitor them. It's part of the job. We would regularly monitor these places, but as we lack manpower, we can't keep watch on them for long. Now it can be handled to you." "I can do that." As he looked at old Neil's serious expression, Klein was dumbfounded. "This is making an expense claim for private matters. I know nothing about such matters. Indeed, I'm just a keyboard warrior." "You wish to use your own money to do this?" Old Neil smiled as he added when he saw Klein's face. Klein immediately shook his head as he answered firmly, "I plan on reporting it to Captain." Old Neil nodded in satisfaction and looked at the cup of coffee with the unpleasant thing inside. It had not been poured away. "What did you put in there?" Klein smiled embarrassingly. "It's just some dirt underneath my boots. Its color and your coffee powder looks almost the same." Old Neil was taken aback as he suddenly clasped his mouth and roared, "Why aren't you pouring it away yet?" Chapter 41. Audrey and her Susie. After pouring away the coffee and returning to the armory to take the thick stack of historical materials and explanatory transcripts from Old Neil, Klein followed the wall of lights up the staircase to the Blackthorn Security Company. Tap, tap, tap. His footsteps echoed in the sealed and quiet basement. After Klein left the spiral staircase, he pushed open the door and identified his bearings before heading for the second office opposite of him. After familiarizing himself for 2 days, he had a general understanding of the layout of the Blackthorn Security Company. The entrance brought visitors to a huge reception hall with sofas and tables. Through the partition, there was an inner region. To the left of the corridor were 3 rooms. From the nearest to the furthest, they were Mrs. Oriana's account room, a rest room with a few sofa beds, and the staircase that led underground. On the right were 3 rooms. From the nearest to the furthest was Captain Dunn Smith's office, a civilian staff office with a typewriter, and the entertainment room for formal members of the Nighthawks team. Klein had previously seen Leonard Mitchell playing cards with 2 other teammates in the entertainment room. He guessed that they were playing Fighting the Landlord. Of course, Emperor Roselle had already given it a new name, Fighting Evil. However, the way it was played was identical to what Klein knew. Brett was entitled to a day of sleep after a night shift. Roseanne was at the reception desk. The carriage driver, who was in charge of procuring necessities and collecting supplies, Cesare Francis, was out as usual. When Klein opened the door to the civilian staff office, the 3 desks inside were empty. Only the typewriter sat there silently. "Ackerson Company's Model 1346 typewriter." Klein, who had seen similar objects in his mentor's office and Welch's place, muttered. He felt that the complicated mechanisms inside were filled with the beauty of machinery. He walked to the desk with the typewriter. After preparing himself, he attempted to type something on air. In the beginning, he often converted the local language to Chinese pinyin instinctively. Only after he was familiar with it did he digest the original Klein's corresponding memory fragment and no longer made mistakes. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythmic tapping on the typewriter sounded like a melody composed from the heavy marriage of metal and industry. Under this melody, Klein quickly typed the expenditure application. However, he was in no hurry to meet Dunn Smith. Instead, he focused his mind and read the materials provided by Old Neil seriously. It was both revision and new material. When it was almost noon, he stretched his neck and put away the documents. He then read and consolidated what he had learned on mysticism in the morning. Only after all that did he take his application to the office next door and knocked on the door gently. Dunn was waiting for lunch to be delivered. When he saw Klein hand him the document, the corners of his mouth curved up. "Did Old Neil teach you this?" "Yes." Klein did not hesitate to betray Old Neil. Dunn picked up his dark red fountain pen and signed it. "I happen to be applying for funding for the months of July, August, and September from the church and the police department. I'll add yours in. When it's approved, get the money from Mrs. Oriana. You can draw the spirit pendulum in the afternoon." "All right," Klein answered simply and vigorously. His tone and eyes were obviously filled with joy. Before bidding Dunn farewell, he asked casually, "Shouldn't the budget for July, August, and September be applied for by June? Why are you applying for July's budget only in July?" Dunn fell silent for a few seconds before sipping his coffee. "We encountered 3 cases in June. I was so busy that I forgot about it." As expected of Captain and his poor memory, Klein knew he had asked a question he should not have asked. He gave a chuckle before leaving immediately. With that, he began a simple but regular lifestyle. He would spend half an hour in the early morning cogitating. He would have 2 hours of mysticism lessons in the morning and an hour and a half of studying the historical documents. After lunch, he would take a short nap in the break room to regain his energy. Following that, he would draw bullets and head to the shooting club. After finishing his practice, he would stroll over to Welch's place, which was not too far. He would then change routes and return to Iron Cross Street. That way, he could save on the carriage fees. If he had time, he would practice his spirit vision and spirit dowsing. On the way, he would buy groceries. In a private chemistry laboratory equipped with apparatus and items. A tall, blonde Audrey was looking at the cup in her hand. There were countless bubbles, and it made the atmosphere serene. Finally, the liquid in the cup precipitated into a sticky silver substance. Ha ha ha, I'm indeed talented in mysticism. I succeeded in one try. I was worried of failure and prepared 2 sets of materials, the girl muttered to herself in delight. She put away the items she took from her family's vault, or exchanged them with others. She took a deep breath and prepared to close her eyes to drink down the spectator potion. At that moment, barking sounded from outside the laboratory. Audrey frowned instantly. She hid the cup of silver liquid in a dark corner, turned around, and headed to the door. "Susie, who's here?" Audrey turned the doorknob and asked the golden retriever sitting in front of the door. Susie wagged her tail in an obsequious manner. Her personal maidservant, Annie, had appeared in the corridor nearby. Audrey walked out of the laboratory and closed the door. She looked at Annie and said, "Didn't I tell you? Do not disturb me when I'm running chemistry experiments." A vexed Annie answered, "But there's an invitation from the Duchess, Duchess Della." "Duke Negan's wife?" Audrey took a few steps forward and asked Annie. "Yes, she has managed to hire the services of the palace's baker, Madame Vivi, and plans to invite you and Madame to afternoon tea." Annie recounted the invitation. Audrey tapped her cheeks discreetly and said, "Tell my mother that I have a headache. Perhaps I'm a little dehydrated because of the scorching sun. Please get her to convey my apologies to Madame Della." As she spoke, she acted frail. "Miss, it's not only afternoon tea but a literature salon," added Annie. "But that won't treat my dizziness. I need rest," rejected Audrey firmly. Simultaneously, she muttered deep down, "If they insist, I'll faint for all of you to see. The etiquette teacher said that I can do it most perfectly. I think I heard something." "All right," Annie exhaled and said, "Do you need me to help you back to your room?" "There's no need. I'll clean up the laboratory first." Audrey was yearning to return immediately to consume the potion. However, she suppressed her impatience. She only returned to the laboratory's entrance when she saw Annie leave. Suddenly, she discovered that the golden retriever, Susie, who was waiting outside, was gone. Furthermore, the door to the laboratory was half opened. "I forgot that Susie can open doors with handles. What was that sound? Not good." Audrey heard crisp sounds coming from within. Suddenly, she came to a realization as she charged into the laboratory. All she could see was the cups shattered on the floor. Susie was licking the final drop of silver liquid. Audrey stood rooted at the entrance like a statue. Susie immediately sat down and looked at her owner innocently as she wagged her tail. In the seas beyond the Pritz Harbor, there was an island perennially enveloped in storms. An ancient sailboat was docked at its harbor. A blond man dressed in a robe with lightning patterns was looking at Alger Wilson opposite to him. He asked, perplexed, "Alger, you could have returned to the kingdom and become a captain of a mandated Punisher team or a reputable bishop. Why did you choose to voyage out into sea and become the captain of the Blue Avenger?" Alger wore a stoic expression on his rough face. He replied solemnly, "The sea belongs to the storm. This is the Lord's kingdom. I'm willing to abide by the Lord's will and monitor this area of his kingdom." "All right." The blonde-haired man clenched his fist and struck his chest. "May the storm be with you." "May the storm be with you," Alger replied with the same standard salute. He stood on the deck with a few sailors and watched his companions leave the boat, walking into the distance. "Science, you do not understand because you do not know enough," Alger muttered silently. Meanwhile, Audrey finished her second concoction in a panic-stricken state, seeing that the silver potion looked nothing different from before. She was nearly moved to tears. Gulp. She quickly drank down the spectator potion. Friday. A storm befell Tingen. The heavy rain pounded on the windows of every household. Inside the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein, Roseanne, and Brett sat on the sofa in the reception hall and enjoyed lunch. As there was only a kettle for boiling water, there was no way to heat up leftovers. Klein could not eat rye bread every day or take the carriage home every day. If he did that, he would have to walk from Iron Cross Street to Welch's place in the afternoon and consider taking a carriage back. It was a waste of money. Therefore, he began joining Roseanne and his colleagues in eating the so-called office rations. The nearby Old Will's restaurant would punctually send a waiter at 10:30 every day. He would ask for their orders, and after determining the quantity, he would send it over at 12:30. The food was contained in what resembled meal boxes. At 3, he would return to take their orders for dinner and take back the utensils. The rations included meat, vegetables, and bread. Although the quantity was lacking, it was barely sufficient to fill a person. A cost of a meal ranged from 7 to 10 pence depending on the different premium levels. Klein would always thicken his skin and order the meal costing 7 pence. Typically, there was half a pound of wheat bread, a tiny piece of meat cooked in different ways, a ladle of thick soup with vegetables, and tiny bits of butter or margarine. "We actually only have one Nighthawk here today," Roseanne said as she delivered a spoonful of thick soup into her mouth. "I heard that a case with cultist elements is going on in Golden Indus. Therefore, the police department has requested for 2 Nighthawks," Brett said as he put down his bread. Klein used the remaining wheat bread and dabbed it into the last bits of meat juice before stuffing it into his mouth. He did not say a word. Under his left sleeve, there was a silver chain with a topaz hanging. At that moment, knocks sounded outside the half-closed main door. "Please come in." Roseanne was taken aback as she put down her spoon. She quickly used a handkerchief to wipe her mouth and stood up. The door was pushed open as a man in a halved top hat came in. The left shoulder of his black formal suit was drenched. The sides of his hair had grayed. He put away his umbrella and said to Klein and company, "Is this the former small mercenary squad?" "You can say that," answered Roseanne like clockwork. The lanky man coughed and said, "I have a mission request." Chapter 42. Butler Klee. A mission request. You probably came to the wrong place. This security company's signboard is really nothing but a signboard. Klein immediately held back his urge to lampoon when he heard the visitor, how he yearned for there to be a message board and a screen for him to share his thoughts. But he soon realized that he had once asked a similar question. The captain's answer was that they could take on jobs if they were free. The money earned could be used as funding for the team's petty cash account and bonuses for the participants. Roseanne's eyes darted around as she thought for a moment before saying, "Our security personnel are all out on missions. The fastest it will take for them to return is an hour. If your matter isn't urgent, you can consider our services." Among the 6 formal Nighthawk members, Captain Dunn Smith had been invited to the cathedral by the bishop for some unknown discussion. Leonard Mitchell was guarding Chanis Gate in his place. Corpse Collector Fry and Sleepless Royale Redeen had already headed to the Golden Indus Borough to assist the police in the investigation of a robbery case with cultist inklings. Sleepless Kenley White was on leave, while midnight poet Sika Tron had gone to Raphael Cemetery in the north suburb for a daily patrol. As for the remaining 2 Beyonders, Old Neil was frail and too advanced in his years. He had not taken any missions in a long time. Klein was still a novice and was truly inadequate in various aspects. "They are all out." With one hand holding his umbrella, the lanky man's expression turned gloomy as he took off his hat. He bowed and said, "Sorry for intruding. Goodbye." He turned around and walked out. He went down the stairs and left 36 Zudaland Street amid the spattering rain and howling winds. What a bloody pity! Roseanne watched the man left and sighed regretfully. Although she would not have gotten any share of the commission, she definitely would have been able to partake in a sumptuous meal. "There's nothing we can do about it. Chanis Gate needs someone watching it all the time." Klein put down his cutlery in satisfaction. Even though he did not like the soup mixture of turnips and vegetables, he still drank it clean. Don't tell me you want Brett to take the mission? Or yourself? Roseanne rolled her eyes and giggled. Brett won't do, but you can. Our Mr. Seer. The moment she finished her sentence, she immediately realized what she had just said. She covered her mouth in shock because the door had not been fully closed. If someone walked past outside or heard anything about Beyonders, it would be considered a leak. Thankfully, Captain isn't around. Roseanne looked out the door and secretly stuck her tongue out. Or I'll have to go for confession again. Brett and Klein laughed out in unison as they exchanged looks before beginning to put away the cutlery. After everything was done, Klein, who did not bring his umbrella, decided to stay at Blackthorn Security Company due to the ongoing rain. He took out some newspapers and sat on the soft but bouncy sofa as he leisurely began his afternoon break. The airship route from Backlund to Desi Bay is now in service. The complete anthology of the great detective Manseng is publishing soon. An advertisement for Legolas weapons. A standard model revolver carrying 6 bullets costs £3.10 solely. A double-barrel gun costs £2. Klein flipped through the Tingen City Honest paper when a particular piece of news suddenly caught his attention. The suspect responsible for killing Mr. Welch and Miss Naya has been caught. We believe it is a much-needed reprieve from the horror that has gripped North Borough, Golden Indus Borough, and East Borough. Welch's father, Mr. McGovern, who is a banker, has escorted his youngest son's corpse back to Constant City, where a grand burial will be held. After reading it a few times, Klein suddenly sighed. From the looks of it, Welch's father had bought the police's explanations and did not hire a private investigator to investigate the matter. His grief from losing his youngest son can't be any greater than that of my parents who lost their only son. In a sullen mood, Klein sat there motionless for a long time. He neither found it odd that he was not invited to Welch's and Naya's burials, nor did he feel depressed. Once everything calms down, I'll find a chance to offer a bouquet of flowers to their graves. Klein was about to take a nap in the break room when a knock came from the door of the reception hall again. Please come in. Roseanne, who was nodding off, suddenly jolted awake. The half-closed door was pushed open again. The lanky man from before walked in once again. Can I wait here? Your mercenaries, no. Security personnel should be back soon, right? He asked sincerely, trying his best to hide his anxious expression. Sure. Please have a seat. Roseanne pointed at the sofa nearby. Klein asked out of curiosity, Where did you hear about our security company? Who introduced you here? He had made 2 trips despite the heavy afternoon storm while still willing to wait? Yes. The Nighthawks must have easily resolved missions that might seem very difficult to others. They must have accrued quite a reputation. The man left his umbrella outside the door, and as he walked to the sofa, he replied with a rueful smile, I have traveled the nearby streets and paid a visit to all the mercenaries, security companies and private investigators. You are my only hope. The others do not have the manpower to take additional missions. To be frank, if not for the waiter that delivers meals, I really did not imagine that there was another security company here. It's completely different from what I imagined. Klein was stunned. Roseanne interjected with a question. They are very busy? Are there that many missions? The man sat down and sighed. You are a mercenary team. No, a security company. I believe you must have heard of the armed burglary murder at Howes Street? Howes Street. Armed burglary murder. All right, unfortunately, I'm one of the people involved. Klein nodded with a slightly heavy heart. Yes. Due to the presence of a ferocious and cruel criminal, the rich men living in the neighboring streets and even across all of Tingen City are terrified. Apart from increasing the numbers of their security detail, they have also hired many more security personnel and private detectives. This resulted in a shortage of supply in your line of work, the tall and skinny man explained clearly. A standard chain reaction. Klein and Roseanne exchanged looks and saw the self-deprecating smile from each other's faces. The security industry had entered a golden age. Yet Blackthorn Security Company was not affected in any way. It was apparent how dismally the company was run. Of course, to a certain extent, it also proved the success of the Nighthawks in hiding themselves. After waiting for another 20-plus minutes, Klein prepared to leave since the rain was coming to a stop. He planned on practicing at the shooting club. At that moment, the black-haired and green-eyed Leonard Mitchell walked out of the partition. He looked curiously at the sofa. "This is? A client. Is Captain back?" Roseanne asked delightfully. "Back?" The lanky man was taken aback when he heard that. He had been sitting there staring at the door. How did he not discover someone's return? Roseanne's expression immediately froze as she chuckled. "As a security company, we don't only use the front door." "Figures." The lanky man nodded in enlightenment. He was also not surprised by the term captain. Security companies were mercenary teams or small-scale mercenary guilds. It was normal for captain to be used. Leonard did not tuck in his white shirt. His black vest was also casually draped on. He took a glance at the lanky man when he suddenly snapped his fingers and said, "I'm a member of the security personnel at Blackthorn. How might I address you? How may I help you?" Perhaps it was because he had long heard about the unrestrained characters of mercenaries that he did not feel the anger of being humiliated. Instead, he let out a breath of relief. He watched Leonard sit down and organized his words. "My name is Klein, a butler of Mr. Vickroy, a tobacco merchant. His only son, little Elliot, was kidnapped this morning. We have already informed the police and the matter has been given high priority. However, Mr. Vickroy remains uneasy. He wishes to go through the channels which mercenaries, security personnel have, as well as your understanding of Tingen, to investigate the case from a different angle and ensure that little Elliot is rescued safely. If you are able to find where the kidnappers are hiding, Mr. Vickroy will be willing to pay you £100. If you have the means to successfully save young Master Elliot, he is willing to pay double, £200. Leonard Mitchell smiled leisurely. "Mr. Vickroy seems to only wish for us to find the kidnappers' hideout. If not, he will not think that his only son is worth £100. A tobacco merchant who has close ties with the southern plantations will not just offer £200. No, Mr. Vickroy is only an ordinary merchant. He's not considered wealthy. Besides, he believes the police will be more professional when it comes to rescuing his son," Klein answered frankly. "All right, no problem." Leonard snapped his fingers again. His green eyes turned their gaze on Roseanne. "My beautiful lady, please write up a contract. Don't always act like a poet. In fact, all you do is recite the works of others." Having forgotten the presence of the client, Roseanne quipped. She was used to exchanging snipes with Leonard. Of course, the Blackthorn Security Company did not really care about its clients. It was great to have them, but it was also fine not having them. Roseanne left the reception counter and entered the staff office. Soon, there were sounds of typing coming out from the office. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a little. He found them too unprofessional. There was no standard template for a contract. This sure is tragic. And more saddening is the fact that I'm working at such an unprofessional company. The moment these thoughts arose in him, Roseanne completed a simple contract that had only a few clauses. Then Klein and Leonard Mitchell signed it. After Klein stamped it, she took the contract and returned to the accounting room and got Mrs. Oriana to stamp it with the Blackthorn Security Company logo, something that was actually useless. Dunn typically handed it to Oriana for safekeeping. On Sunday, it would be passed to Roseanne and company. "I'll wait for your good news." After receiving one copy of the contract, Klein stood up and bowed with his hat off. Leonard did not respond. He seemed to be in deep thought. He suddenly turned his head toward Klein and revealed a smile. "I need your help." "Ah?" Klein was taken aback. "I mean, you and I can finish this mission together." The corners of Leonard's mouth curved up slightly as he explained. "I'm good at combat, shooting, climbing, sensing and chanting and taking on some support roles. But that does not include looking for people. You don't expect old Neil to go out in such weather, right?" When he said sensing, his voice was lowered to a mumble that Klein could barely hear. All right. Klein did have the urge to attempt his new abilities, while also feeling a little wary toward Leonard Mitchell. Phew. Let's hope it will be completed successfully. I wonder how useful my seer abilities will be. He wondered with some anticipation.